There we go. Okay. So, talking about Viktor Frankl, he's got several books. He's a survivor of the Holocaust, psychiatrist, and the theory that he talks about is called logotherapy. And you might think, well, that just means a logical therapy, but he's talking about the need for meaning in your life. You have to have a sense of purpose. Today we also talk about narratives. You've got to believe a story that you're in, that you've got a role to play, that in this particular story you can learn about how to play your role so that you're doing a good job in that role, and that role is valuable because it enables certain kinds of goals to be achieved, not only by you but also by the community and so on. So you believe in these stories that, if you think of the famous situation of the two guys in the foxhole, with the enemy coming, I'm thinking of the Blitzkrieg, the Germans are coming with the tanks, and you're basically out of ammunition, it's cold, you're freezing, and the one guy who doesn't believe in the point of being there basically has no reason for staying in the foxhole, but he wants to run for his life. The other guy who believes that our side is the side that's standing for justice in the world and that we've got to fight them with everything we've got, he's willing to literally stay in the foxhole and deal with the attack as best as he can, right? So you think between the two of them, it's just their own mental beliefs that enables the one to stay and fight while the other one is scared to death and wants to leave, right?
Just like the sons who had an alcoholic dad, one turned out to be an alcoholic himself and said, I grew up watching my dad. And the other one turned out to never drink a day in his life because he said, I grew up watching my dad.
Yeah. But it's not just, that difference is there because of a major mental difference between the two of them.
Yeah.
The one is not going to be that way. He's decided.
Yeah.
He's talking about that in this.
Right.
Very confusing the way he tries to explain that. But the idea that you have your own power over yourself, right? That you are making the decision, even if it's a really horrible situation, right? He, in describing his survival in the camps, it's amazing. He talks about how when the Germans were starving them and beating them and forcing them to work even though they were exhausted and hungry and cold, he retreated mentally inside himself and kind of observed what was happening from inside his head. It's not so. In a sense, what was happening to his body was not happening to him. He, in a sense, was isolated and safe because he was mentally watching what was happening to him. I remember thinking when I was in basic training, I had finished, I had my master's degree. I remember it being funny because at the doing the paperwork, the young man that was taking my information said, how much schooling do you have? I said, well, I have a master's degree. And he looked at me puzzled and he says, is that like an associate's? And I said, yeah, it's kind of like an associate's, but how many years? So I gave him, I forget how many years, I added up, 4 after high school, and then officially, I guess, 2 is a master's, right? So I added that up, and he wrote it down. But here I am in basic training with the drill sergeants trying to tear me down, as you know, right? And that's their job. Their job is to take all these recruits and
Tear them down
to nothing, and then build them up as members of a team, a green team in the Army. Maybe you're blue in the Air Force, I don't know.
I was Army.
But so that's, and you could watch them, and I thought they were really good. They knew what they were doing. They had a lot of the guys in tears. And my problem was trying not to laugh, because I'm thinking this is absolutely hilarious.
I thought it was annoying. It was just like, oh my god. It wasn't difficult. It wasn't stressful. It was just like, when is this gonna be over? I'm so annoyed. I totally know what you mean.
You do have to learn all the habits and all the vocabulary and so on. You have to learn all that, and they did all that, and plus they gave you some skills that you might not have had, like shooting your weapon, bandaging a friend in need, all that kind of stuff. Gas mask, there are things that you could very well end up needing down the road. So that was all good, but at the same time, you realize they're going through mental games with you, trying to erase whatever your attachments were and start you all over again. And it did work on, of course, the younger folks mostly. But I was like him. I had to retreat and watch what they were doing to me and not let it bother me. Right? I had to play the role. So when the drill sergeant said nasty things to me, I had to say, "Yes, drill sergeant," and not break up laughing and roll on the floor, because that would, of course, just made it worse. So, don't react that way. Keep a straight face. That's important. And that's the Stoic. That's the Stoic, keeping a straight face despite what's going on. And not let it get to you. Right? So you're still experiencing eudaimonia despite the fact that you were doing your duty, you're taking care of business, you're making sure that, as boring as the job might be, that somebody's taking care of it, and so on and so forth. So, Stoic is a really important one. And that's the one that really runs the empire. And by the way, you can compare that with the Nazis. If you think of it, the Nazis in the Nuremberg trials, they're arrested and they're charged with all the crimes against the non-combatants and so on that they were guilty of. Their defense was, I had to do my duty. I did follow my orders. So they were using a Stoic ethic that we, of course, overpowered, because we said, okay, our morality is the one that won, and our morality says you're not allowed to kill people, even if you're ordered to do it. You can always say no, and as Jean-Paul Sartre even argues, you can always let them kill you rather than kill innocent people. So you have no defense to say that you had no choice. Right? One of the more famous Nazis was captured in South America and taken to Jerusalem for trial. And during the trial, an American reporter, who is also a philosopher, was there, Hannah Arendt, and she famously, in watching him, argued that he was not evil. He was just a bureaucrat doing his job. And that's how he explained himself. Eichmann was his name. He was like the head of the organization that got all the people on the trains and to the various camps. Right? And she coined the phrase, the banality of evil. The banality of evil. It didn't make her famous at the time, because an awful lot of people were mad at her. They wanted her to say he was evil incarnate. And she was being honest and saying, no, he was just a bureaucrat doing his job, blinders on to what evil this job was. He was just making sure he did a good job, making sure everybody got on the train, etc. The banality of evil. And what that means is we're all capable of it. He's just like one of us. It was his circumstances where it was his job to do the evil things.
That's fair.
And whoa, you imagine the hue and cry that people thought about Hannah Arendt. In fact, one of the things she married, as you can see, you see her gravestone. This is at college in New York, by the way. I don't know many colleges that actually have dead faculty members buried on campus.
Yeah, that's
Pretty weird.
You mean you don't want to be buried on campus?
I actually, Donna and I have already chosen we want to be buried at Fort Rich. On the cemetery there, we've already gone for a stroll. I don't know why she wanted to.
Pick out your headstone.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing though, because we can't have any jokes on the headstones there. They're all serious.
Right. Yeah.
I would have loved to have had something dumb.
Yeah,
You know,
it's more
this is the toughest spot I've ever been in. You know, or something.
I mean, is there anything that actually like prohibits it?
Pardon?
Is there anything that actually prohibits it?
I believe you just get your name right.
Just your name. Gotcha.
Dates and stuff. But, so here's her name, Hannah Arendt, or Arendt, heard her pronounced both ways. Notice she married another professor that she loved from years back named Blücher. Blücher? Does that ring a bell?
No.
No? That would make her Frau Blücher, right?
Frau is Mrs., yeah.
Frau Blücher, right? So, this is a Mel Brooks movie.
I am Paul Luca.
Here, may I present Frau Blücher? After you, Frau Blücher.
Throughout the whole movie, every time they say her name, the horses neigh.
Oh. I watched this in German class my junior year. I remember because that creepy guy.
So here's my thesis, right? That Mel Brooks and members of the Jewish community were so angry at Hannah Arendt Blücher that he did this little sketch thrown into his hilarious movie, Young Frankenstein, that basically makes fun of her, right? But he was actually asked about that, and he said no, it had nothing to do with her. I don't really So that's kind of,
Man,
yeah. There's movies about her, and they're good. There's a good movie about her at the Eichmann trial and all of that. I think I've watched the movie, and I'm not sure if I checked it out or if it's just on the internet. Okay. So, I had this on. So that's just kind of interesting. Okay, so the Stoics. Let me move on to the next one. The Neoplatonists. And as you can imagine, neo just means new, and Platonists means they're followers of Plato. Although there's a little catch, and the one example that we use is Plotinus. Plotinus. And the example of his writings that we have is the Aeneid. I don't know what happened to his nose.
I was actually wondering, like, did they actually look like this? Because it's like an accurate description.
And that's when he was 5. No, I don't.
You know, because it's not an actual picture. It's a carving.
Right, right. Well, 204 to 270 AD.
And then, like, how long did these people actually live?
Well, if you're figuring that that's 66 years.
I feel like that's a really long time.
Yeah.
I didn't think people, like, lived that long back then.
So here's
64, 65.
I still beat it.
How old are you?
I'm 68.
Nice.
And a half.
And a half.
It's still going. Thanks to my St. Bernard that won't let me sit. However. So Plotinus. One of the interesting things, his teacher, Ammonius Saccas, what? Okay. So he's one of his teachers of Plotinus, and he was a Christian for a while. He was a Christian, but it is now generally assumed that there was a different Ammonius of Alexandria. Ooh, that's new. I haven't seen that before. Yay, Wikipedia. They're updating it constantly as we go. But, so clearly when we're looking at this time period, though, we're looking at the Christian era. That might be why his nose looks that way. So that's kind of interesting. But basically his philosophy is Platonic with some differences. And the way I explain the differences is remember the idea that Plato has is that there's matter and there's the ideas, the eidos. And these are totally abstract. Don't exist any place because they don't have any substance, right? Plato does use the metaphor of the sun as an explanation of how the ideas kind of shine on matter, but Plotinus seems to take this much more seriously, so that the idea of the ideas is that they actually physically exist somehow and really radiate into matter. So it's more of a physical connection between the ideas, heaven, and the material world, and that you could actually go back and forth. And he claimed to have had 4 experiences where in meditating he was able to become one with the all. So he's a meditative philosopher. By meditating, you become one with the all and experience oneness with the universe. So that's different than Plato. His one book of writings, which I have, go back here, look at Plotinus. These Aeneads mean the 9s. So each of the 6 Aeneads has 9 parts. And each of them is called a tractate. But the so the soul is a little bit more physical somehow. So he's also very interested in beauty, and he's also convinced in the what we refer to as the golden ratio. You familiar with the golden ratio? The golden ratio, that's very, very neat. So the golden ratio works out to be 1.61, whatever. 1.61, and notice that it's just like pi, a ratio that can, it's a non-repeating infinite decimal. Right? By the way, it's almost half of pi. Remember, pi is 3.215, something like roughly half. That's kind of interesting. But they call this the golden mean, or the golden section, or the golden cut. Lots of others like that. The mathematicians are familiar with it. They use it in construction. You have it in your own body, for example. So if you measure the width of your front tooth and move to the next tooth, it goes down by the golden ratio. And then when you go to the next one, it goes down by the golden ratio. It's in nature. So basically, a perfect example of it would be the shell of the Nautilus. I think they have that in here, the shell of the Nautilus. Look at the segments of the shell, they increase in size by the golden ratio. But it's not just, that's just a really startling example, but leaves and bushes and veins and capillaries, when you go up in size, they go up by the golden ratio as well. It's really a kind of mathematical, amazing characteristic of the entire natural world, not like crystals and
Yeah. I was going to
minerals
ask
and
you,
things.
so I know that my husband is a goof, and he like has started to dive into the theory that like we're actually in simulation, and that and that like none of this has sense, and that oh I can't shoot. It's like the smallest.
The Planck scale.
No. Oh my gosh, I'm totally
Pixel?
blanking what it is. Like smaller than
A light.
atoms.
The quark.
Nope. Gosh, dang it. I can't think of it.
When you do
But-
think of it, you can always just.
Yeah.
But
But-
so
I don't
Plotinus is into this mathematical stuff.
Yeah.
Convinced that the divine influences everything in the earth through beauty. Pretty weird stuff, actually.
Yeah.
But interesting. So, Plotinus is pretty interesting. Okay. So, we need to move on to the.
And we don't have any quiz questions yet. You said that you normally make one of them about
So, yeah, so let me ask the first one on the golden ratio. What do you think of the golden ratio? I think it influences not only physical beauty, but also mathematical, musical. So when you listen to what kind of music is beautiful, I suspect the golden ratio has something to do with that as well. So what do you think of the golden ratio? Quiz question number 1. So, hey, we already came close thinking about the Neoplatonists and Christianity, because there's overlap philosophically. And the thing of it is you have a narrative about a particular individual, Jesus, but his narrative is interpreted in terms of a philosophy. And the philosophy that was the main philosophy of the day, even though Aristotle seems to be a much stronger philosophy, not that many people were aware of Aristotle's philosophy. Remember, the books got hidden and stuff of that sort. So the main philosophy of the day is the Platonists, right? So the current Platonists, like Plotinus, kind of blends very closely into what people thought the world was like. And when you're creating a church dogma, basically, you're going to end up having to have a philosophy that the story fits. So, for example, when you ask, what did Jesus accomplish, and so on, it has to make sense philosophically. And Platonism is going to be the philosophy of the day, right? But let's go and look at the actual background of Christianity. First off, we have to think about the predecessor to it, because Christianity didn't come to be just out of no place, but instead, if you remember, Jesus was Jewish, and so first we have to think about Jewish religion. So, the Jewish religion traces itself back to Abraham. It's kind of an interesting story. Abraham led his family out of the city Ur, U-R, of the Chaldees, because he was told to by God to leave, and began wandering the desert, etc. And then along came the Elohim. You ever heard this story? The Elohim? Elohim means Elohim, the base word or the root word is El, E-L. Think about this. You're familiar with Allah, Allah. Elohim is actually the plural of El. And then you have other gods in the neighborhood, for example, Baal. Notice Jewish names like Rachel, Michael, Gabriel, Daniel, etc., right? Ariel, all of these are Hebrew that mean shield of God, lion of God, mouth of God, etc., right? So El basically is one of the words for God in Hebrew. Right? The other one is Yahweh, which you've probably heard of, and what we know today is that these were two different traditions. One was from the one temple and the other one was from the other. So you actually had Judah and Bethel, which Bethel, right? Notice, right?
Israel.
Pardon?
I just read the word Israel. Israel.
Israel, one explanation for that I've heard is that Is is temple, Ra is highest, and El is God. So, temple of the Most High God. That's Israel. Right? By the way, notice that the people ended up being captured as slaves because of the famine and everything in Egypt. And of course, Moses is the one that leads them out of Egypt. Probably familiar with that, the Exodus. And the interesting connection there is the first monotheist is Akhenaten. You're going to hate me for this. But that's okay. You have to suffer. At least some of the time.
You got the order to launch. And if you want to bow out, that was your chance.
I have the speakers up all the way, but so this is Akhenaten. Don't be surprised when he sings, because he is a very high tenor.